Welcome to WITMonth. August is Women in Translation Month, a month where you read nothing but women in translation. Women or women identifying people whose books are written in another language and have been translated into English by a male, female, or non-binary translator. I love WITMonth. I read mostly women in translation anyway, and this is a really exciting time for me, so what I've done this year is I've made a challenge list. I've got 6 things for you to do. It's not stressful. I've just put together a little challenge that I think will feed your inspiration when it comes to trying to diversify your reading for WITMonth. It's up to you whether or not you do this challenge at all, or how many parts of it you try to tick off, but I've done enough research to know that you can tick off all 6 if you read 3 or more books during WITMonth. We'll get to it in a second, but before we get there, I just want to talk about what books I'm going to be reading during WITMonth and what recent reads that I recommend. My 3 books for WITMonth are Magma by Thora Hjorlisdottir. This is a book that has increasingly been on my radar. I did discuss it in my books coming out in July, and I haven't actually got to it yet. So it came out in July, this is a review copy, I still haven't read it, it was published by Picador. It's translated by Meg Matic, or Matic, I'm not sure. And it's a claustrophobic romantic drama about toxic relationships. That's all I really know about it. I'm going to read it and report back and maybe do a full video review, we'll see. I'm also going to read The Lying Life of Adults by Elena Ferrante. This will be my first Ferrante novel, which is pretty shocking. She's perhaps the most well-known woman in translation of any kind from around the world right now. She's an Italian author, but no one actually knows who she is. It's a pseudonym. Some people think she might even be a man, but probably not. We don't actually know who she is, but she's a really, really big deal. I don't read enough Italian literature, and so I'm finally going to read a Ferrante novel. This was translated into English by Anne Goldstein, so you have a female writer and a female translator. I'm also going to reread some of the stories from this collection, Things Remembered and Things Forgotten. This is written by Kyoko Nakajima, and it is translated by Ian MacDonald and Ginny Tapley Takimori. So you've got one male and one female translator. I've already talked about this book quite a lot in more than one video, and it is right now one of my favourite books of this entire year. I love this so much. I've waxed on and on about it already, so you can go look at other videos where I've talked about it. I really love this collection of short stories, and I want to reread a few of them. So that's what I'm going to do for WITMonth. Right now, those are the 3 books that I have planned to read, but 2 recent reads that I really, really enjoyed and I want to talk about. One is Cursed Bunny. Now, I've done a full video review on this already that you can go watch, please do. This is written by Bora Chung, a Korean author, and it's translated by Anton He. I loved Cursed Bunny. This is another short story collection, and it is twisted and strange. It's got body horror, but it's also got fantasy, science fiction, even romance. There's a lot going on here. It pretty much blends all genres of genre fiction together into one wacky and weird and wonderful short story collection. One book that I haven't talked about yet, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about it in my July roundup video, is this. Elena Knows by Claudia Pinheiro. This is translated by Francis Riddle from Spanish, and it's an Argentinian book by one of Argentina's most renowned and famous authors. Claudia Pinheiro is best known as a crime writer, but this is not really a crime novel. It kind of looks like that at first, but it's not. I have a lot of thoughts on this book. It is a book about religion and patriarchy and misunderstandings within family. It is told from the perspective of a kind of unreliable and misinformed narrator, and it tells the story of a woman, Elena, whose daughter has just died. Elena's in her 60s and her daughter, I think, is around 30, and she was found hanged in their local church, and she definitely killed herself, but Elena doesn't believe that. She thinks something else is going on, and she has her reasons for that, and the whole book is told over the course of one day that is also peppered with flashbacks to when her daughter was alive and how they got to where they are, and Elena also cannot get around very easily because she has Parkinson's disease. As I said, I'm going to talk about this in a bit more detail later, but it's a book that I really, really recommend for WITMonth. Now, as I said, the WITMonth challenge. This is not a stressful thing, this is just 6 criteria that you can try and tick off as you go, as you're reading different books for WITMonth. It's up to you how seriously you take this. I'm just doing it to try to help diversify your reading experience during August. First off, read a book that was published this year in 2021. Every single book that I just mentioned, all the books that I'm going to read, and the 2 books that I have read and I've just recommended to you, were published this year, so any of those would do. They're all women in translation, and they're all 2021 publications in English. 2, read a book that was published more than 10 years ago. How far back you choose to go is really up to you. You can go 1,000 years back and read The Tale of Genji. That was written by a woman, and it's also considered the world's first novel. Or you can go back just 11 years, and there are hundreds upon hundreds of books for you to choose from countries all around the world. That's up to you. Read one fiction. This is easy, but try and pair it with the next one. Read one non-fiction. We don't talk much about non-fiction in translation, and we should. There's a lot of non-fiction that is translated that we don't really think about. A lot of popular science books and history books, for example. These aren't by women in translation, but 2 really good examples are the works of Rutger Bregman and Yuval Harari. Rutger Bregman wrote Humankind and Yuval Harari wrote Sapiens. These 2 books are very, very, very good and very, very famous, but they're actually in translation and we don't really think about that. So find some women in translation who've written fiction. A good example is one that I read recently, Shiori Ito's Black Box, which was translated by Alison Markin Powell. So you've got a woman in translation translated by a woman, and it is non-fiction. That'll work. Next one's a little bit harder, I guess, and that is to try to read 1 book from Europe, 1 book from Asia, and 1 book from Latin America. Asia's a big place, so you can count India, the Middle East, and Russia in that. I am not an expert in African literature in translation. It is a big, big blind spot for me, and I am ashamed of that. But I can't actually recommend any African women in translation, so I've omitted it for the fact that I wouldn't be able to meet this criteria very easily. If you can, great, please, and please recommend me some in the comments. I would love to read more African women in translation, I really, really would. But this one, you can tick off. You can tick off European, Latin American, and Asian, and still cover a fiction, a non-fiction, a book from this year, a book from 10 years ago. You can still do all of that if you combine them with a little bit of savvy. And the last one, which is also pretty easy, is read a book that was written by a woman and translated by a woman. You'd think that that would be easy, and I just said it is, but you have to be careful, because a lot of women in translation are actually translated by men. One of my favorite Japanese authors, Yoko Ogawa, every single one of her books is translated by a man, Stephen Snyder, who does happen to be my favorite translator, but he's a guy. So be careful. Make sure that it is a woman who's also translating it if you're trying to meet this criteria. Bora Chung is a woman, but the translator, Anton Her, is not. Claudia Pinheiro is a woman, and Frances Riddle, the translator, is also a woman, so you could do this. Anyway, I'm kind of spelling these out for you. You get it. The point is, try to diversify across the world as much as you can, and to reiterate, if you have read any African literature in translation, especially by women, please do let me know. I really need more. I have read a few women in translation from Egypt, and Egypt is geographically in Africa, but I think culturally it counts as a Middle Eastern country, so that's a bit of a grey area. So we can count the Middle East in Asia for the sake of this list. Definitely read some Middle Eastern literature in translation. I definitely need to do some videos on it, but I do have some articles about Middle Eastern women in translation that you can check out. Go find them, but I'll do a video on it at some point. Anyway, I'm waffling now. That is your WITMonth challenge. I love WITMonth. It's really, really important to me. Check back in the comments and let me know what books in translation by women in translation you are planning to read for WITMonth. Any that you've read recently that you recommend, and once again, African women in translation. I want to know. All right, that's it. Happy reading. Happy WITMonth. Subscribe for books.